Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you can be alerted when new content is released. Enjoy the video.
Now, if you set up the conditions in the environment and you give them the proper instruction,
That's important.
That's important. They have to get their behaviors to match their intentions, just like any skill. Get their actions equal to their thoughts, get their mind and body working together. When they do, they are going to have a new experience, and it's going to change them. And experience enriches the circuits in their brain philosophically, and then all of a sudden, the end product of an experience is an emotion. And the moment you feel more whole, the moment you feel more unlimited, the moment you feel more worthy, the moment you feel that emotion, now you're teaching your body chemically to understand what your mind is intellectually understood. So we say knowledge is for the mind, but experience is for the body. And in that
moment,
moment,
work together.
They're embodying the truth. Mind and body are now working together. And the end product of that is we begin to change our genetic expression. So here's the point. If you've done it once, you should be able to do it again, right?
You would think.
So as you begin to repeat the experience over and over again, you're going to neurochemically condition your mind and body to begin to work as one. When you've done something so many times that your body now knows how to do it as well as your mind, now it's innate in you. It's second nature. It's who you are. It's automatic. It's effortless. Now you're beginning to master that philosophy, and it's who you are. You're being it. Our job then is to go from philosopher to initiate to master, from knowledge to experience to wisdom, from mind to body to soul, from thinking to doing to being, to learning it with your head, applying it with your hands, and knowing it by heart. And we have all the biological and neurological machinery to do it.
Let's go to one of your workshops, Joe.
And we could actually predict the moment a person is going to go into a superconscious state. So we do certain different meditations to begin to activate latent centers in the brain. So let's say a person has a betrayal or a trauma or a shock. Do you know, the stronger the emotion that you feel from some situation in your life, the more altered you feel inside of you.
Of course. Yeah.
The more altered you feel inside of you, the more you pay attention to the cause, and the brain freezes the image and takes a snapshot, and that's called a memory. So the stronger the emotion you feel, the more long-term memories you create. So now, that's branded neurologically in the brain, and it's emotionally conditioned in the body. So people tend to think neurologically within the circuits of those past experiences, and then they tend to feel emotionally within the boundaries of those chemical events. And how we think and how we feel, George, is our state of being. So most people are defined as an identity by their past memories. So then the question is, how do you change that? Because the strong emotion could actually downregulate a gene that can begin to signal a disease.
Right, right.
So then, when we begin to induce these states where a person is going to have a transcendental moment, there's this very significant change that takes place in the brain. And all of a sudden now, 95% of who we are as a personality by the time we're 35 years old is a set of memorized behaviors, emotional reactions, unconscious attitudes and beliefs and perceptions that function like a computer program. So most of the mind is stored in the body. So 5% of our conscious mind is working against 95% of what we've memorized subconsciously. So what's an example of that? Well, an example is you may not remember a phone number. Remember, we're old enough to know this. You pick up the phone, you look at the receiver, and you dial the number.
Right.
You couldn't remember it consciously, but your body did it so many times that it knew how to do it as well as your mind, right? So that's who we are subconsciously. So the trauma is stored in the body as well as in the brain. So then when a person begins to activate these latent systems, energy begins to travel right up the spine, and we can actually predict the moment's going to happen. We actually say, when scientists come and study us, we'll say, she's going to pop. What do you mean?
And you need to watch that happen.
I always say, and she's going to pop in 5 minutes here. You watch. And all of a sudden, that energy that's stored in the body begins to move right up the spine, and it goes to a little gate at the brainstem called the thalamic gate. And that gate opens up, and the sympathetic nervous system switches on, and now the body is driving energy up into the brain. It hits the certain areas of the brain, and the brain goes into what's called gamma brainwave patterns. That is a superconscious state.
What's amazing, Doctor, is you're one of the few people, if not the only one, who explains how this works. Nobody else is doing that.
Well, you should sit in on some of our brain science meetings, because there's cussing going on and arguing, because you can't find this in textbooks. This is supernatural, right? So once that energy goes into the brain, I'll give you an example. The brain switches on to such a degree that those measurements you can't find in any neuroscience research. These people are going into such coherence in their brain. Now, coherence is order. But like most normal coherence in the brain, picture a room of 1,000 people and everybody clapping at the same time. They're applauding at a show. That's incoherence, right? There's noise, it's
I love that sound, by the way, if I'm on stage.
Yes, of course. Now, normal coherence, picture the room and every fifth person in that room claps at the same time. That's kind of a brain that has a normal amount of coherence. But when we were measuring this super coherence, picture the entire 1,000 people clapping at the same time to the same rhythm very quickly. That orderliness creates a lot of energy too in the room. So the brain goes into these ecstatic states. That person is having a full-on sensory experience without their senses. Now imagine if your senses were heightened by 25% right now. Everything you're seeing, everything you're hearing, everything you're smelling.
It's heightened by 25%.
Everything you're tasting, everything you're feeling. If your senses are heightened by 25%, so is your awareness of everything around you.
And that's huge.
And you can't have awareness without consciousness, and you can't have consciousness without energy. So all of a sudden the brain switches on, they go into these high states of gamma, and the amount of energy in the brain, I'll give you an example. Most people, if we're measuring their vision, if we're measuring their liver enzymes, if we're measuring their height, if we took 1,000 people and we measured them, you would see this curve called a Z curve or a bell curve. You draw a line right down the middle and you divide it equally in threes. That's 3 standard deviations above normal, 3 standard deviations below normal. That makes up 99.7% of the population. Doesn't matter what we measure.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
It's just there.
Okay, so our measurements in energy in the brain is 200 standard deviations outside of normal, 300 standard deviations outside of normal, 400 standard deviations outside normal. That means you have to draw another 197 blocks, and that line just keeps getting smaller and smaller.
And the day you fall in love, from that moment to the next period, you are actually driving your vehicle with your conscious wishes and desires. And when both people are operating from wishes and desires and not programs, together they manifest heaven on earth. So the simple line is this: we are capable of experiencing heaven on earth. The only problem is, once we default back to the subconscious, we are not operating from our wishes and desires any longer. We are now operating from the downloaded programs. First is 1, 2, 4, doubling, and after a week, 50,000 cells in a petri dish. The most important point is all the cells are genetically identical because they came from one parent. So I have 50,000 genetically identical cells. I split them up into 3 different petri dishes, but I change the culture medium. That's the environment in which cells live. I said, what is culture medium? It's the equivalent of blood. So if I'm growing mouse cells, I look at mouse blood, see the composition, and in the lab, synthesize culture medium based on that. When I grow human cells, I look at human blood composition and culture medium based on that. The significance is this: I can change the composition of the culture medium. So I have genetically identical cells in 3 dishes, but I change the chemistry a little bit in each of the 3 different dishes. So in environment A, the cells form muscle. In environment B, genetically identical cells in a different environment form bone. And in environment C, again, changing the chemical composition of the culture medium, but with genetically identical cells, the cells form fat cells. So the fate of the cells, muscle, bone, fat, wasn't based on genetics. They all had the same genes. It was based on the environment. So you say, okay, cells in a plastic petri dish, culture environment, what the heck does that have to do with me? And here's the answer. When you look in the mirror and see yourself, you see one human looking back, and I go, oh, one organism. I go, misperception. A human is comprised of 50 trillion cells. The cells are the living entity. When I say the word Bruce, that is a word that is covering a community of 50 trillion individual sentient cells. So the point is simple and kind of funny. A human being is a skin-covered petri dish. Underneath your skin, you have 50 trillion cells, and you have culture medium called blood. And I say, here's the point. It doesn't make a difference for the cell if it's in the plastic dish or the skin dish. The fate of the cell is not controlled by the genes, it's controlled by the composition of the culture medium. In your skin-covered petri dish, the culture medium is called blood. And I say, yeah. I say, and the brain is the chemist that determines what is the composition of that blood. And then I lead off to the next and most important fact. I say, well, what chemistry should the brain put into the blood? And I go, it's based on the perception of the mind, the interpretation of the mind. If I open my eyes and I see someone I love, the brain releases chemistry related to love, which is dopamine, pleasure, oxytocin, bonding to the one I love, vasopressin, a chemical in my blood that causes my cells to become more attractive to my mate. And growth hormone is released when you're in love, and that, by the name says, causes you to become healthy. So I'm saying, when a mind perceives love, the chemistry from that brain is chemistry that enhances your vitality. That's why when people are in love, they glow. You go, oh, look, you can see they're in love, how healthy they are. The culture medium in a body perceiving love is healthy. The same person, if they open their eyes and see something that scares them, will not release the same chemistry as in love. If you're afraid, you release stress hormones and inflammatory agents that affect the immune system. So I say, oh my goodness, if I open up my eyes and I see something that scares me, then cortisone and norepinephrine and inflammatory agents called cytokines are released into the culture medium, a different composition of culture medium. Point. The fate of the cell is dependent on the composition of the culture medium.